Hey guys, thanks for tuning in and thanks for returning. If you already listened to my other episodes, my name is Priscilla if you're new here, and let's get started. Last week we talked about a lot of high school memories and some of my Twitter drafts, some of my TikTok videos I'd seen. A little less about teen shows this week just because that's really not what I want to talk about. This week I decided to talk about surrogacy, and if you don't know me, I was a surrogate. Last year, I started the pregnancy for another couple. And then this year in January, I actually gave birth through C-section. And the intended parents I have were extremely grateful. And they now have their beautiful, healthy son. So a friend of mine called yesterday and asked a bunch of questions about surrogacy because he was saying that he didn't really know anyone who was a surrogate aside from me and like Gabrielle Union. Well, she wasn't a surrogate, but she had her own. And so he kind of wanted to hear about surrogacy from my point of view. So I was like, well, that would be a good topic for this podcast. Mostly, I like to talk about pop culture, and I did say that I was going to share some personal stories. So I guess that's what today's going to be about. First thing he asked me was, what was the process like? Because he is thinking about having children one day, but he is gay and he wants to know what the process would be like for a gay intended parent. And my intended parents were actually two men. Obviously, they were gay. And I told him that I didn't really see that part of the process, but I know before you would pick out your surrogate, usually you'd go and fill in an inquiry and kind of sign your contracts on the intended parent side. If you didn't already create embryos with your own IVF clinic, then with us, and I'm going to say us a few times because I actually work for the surrogacy clinic that I'm speaking about now, but I didn't work for them before I became a surrogate. I was just offered the job after doing surrogacy with them. So most parents will come to us and not have anything really done, but they just know that they can't conceive naturally and they want our help. So we have IVF clinics that we work with, and they help those intended parents create embryos, whether it's with their sperm and their egg or donor sperm or donor egg, whatever way they can manage, they make their own embryos and have them ready to go and saved for whenever they do find a surrogate. And that's what happened with my intended parents. They actually lived in Australia and they came to Hawaii, created their embryos. They had a good amount of embryos and they told the doctors, just choose the strongest embryo. We don't care the sex of it. We just want to make sure we have a healthy baby. Then when they found a surrogate, which was me, and this is how it usually goes, you tell your preferences for who you'd like to carry for, and then your intended parents tell the preferences for who they'd like to carry for them. I don't know, maybe if there's like religious preferences and you guys want your views to match up, or if you don't have any at all and it's a little bit easier to just kind of fit you in wherever. But my preference was that I carried for someone within the LGBTQIA community. So whether that was same-sex couple, whether that was a heterosexual couple with maybe one trans intended parent, I didn't care. I just wanted it within the community because I wanted to feel like I was helping out as much as I possibly could. I didn't want it to be like, oh, I'm a surrogate and that's it. I wanted it to align with my views a little bit more and be something bigger than myself, basically. So we were matched based on me wanting to carry for someone in that community. They were a same-sex couple. I was asked if I was okay with caring for someone from another country just because they said that a lot of our same-sex couples were in Australia, and I was completely fine with that. And actually, after we gave our preferences, and of course, there's all the background stuff, like you have to do background checks and they have to look at your medical records, medical history. There's a lot more that goes into it, but I'm just kind of like jumping to the matching with your intended parents part. We both were asked to fill out information and provide photos and kind of like give our stories. So when you get to trying to match with other people, they can kind of send them around like a little Tinder profile, if you will. And the first couple I had read anything about or was sent a profile from were my intended parents. And I read their story. I'd seen it was taking them about 10 years at this point to try and have a child, whether from a surrogate or adoption. I'm not really sure if they did try adoption. I just know it is very difficult for a gay couple to adopt, and it may be that way in Australia. I know gay marriage wasn't even legal until recently there. So I just read their story and it seemed perfect. Like they seemed like the perfect couple. And I started tearing up as soon as I read their story. So I was like, yes, I would love to meet with them and see if I can carry for them. Like I just had that feeling. I immediately knew that there was something there with them. They also read my profile and thought I would be a perfect fit. And then we met on Skype. We talked for about an hour. And after the call, the surrogacy center informed us both that both parties had said we'd like the other party, and we agreed to start this together, go into the baby business, I guess. And then they started doing, writing up the contracts, and from there we went through the whole contract process, which I thought was going to be a lot more time consuming, but they have an attorney who works for them and knows exactly what to write up, works with the intended parents to make sure that all of their requests are put in there, make sure that she covers every base, and then I just had to read through it, and they actually allowed the attorney to read through it with me over the phone. I saw nothing wrong with the contract, and then my husband and I just had to go and get it signed with a notary, and that was basically it. And luckily for me, I did have like easy intended parents who kind of just wanted the basic agreement that most surrogates are given. And I didn't have any special requests given to me. Just don't dye your hair and make sure to eat healthy as far as pregnancy goes, but like nothing extremely out of the ordinary or nothing super special. Like I didn't have to go vegan or vegetarian. They didn't care if I did. They just wanted me to follow the instructions from my OB, which was completely fine for me because it was just like another pregnancy that I had already had, because I had given birth in 2014 to my son and in 2016 to my daughter. So I'm kind of like pretty familiar with pregnancy, and this pregnancy was extremely easy. That's basically it for the whole matching process. Like the intended parents create their embryo and they try and find a surrogate to carry for them. And then you go into the contract process. Now, my friend also asked me, what is it like? Because he was like, are you using your own egg? Like, how does that work? Because I guess he just didn't really know. And I don't blame him because most people don't really know. I informed him about them making their own embryos. And for me, I have had my tubes tied since 2016. And people are like, how are you able to be a surrogate with your tubes tied? Like, that makes no sense. But if you think about it, it actually makes perfect sense because we don't do traditional surrogacy. And traditional surrogacy is when you use your own egg and you carry for your intended parents, basically as the egg donor and the surrogate. But with gestational surrogacy, which is what I did, is I've explained it so many times on my Instagram, but it's being an oven for their bun. So that's why my hashtag was always like their bun, my oven. And all we needed basically was, of course, a healthy body overall and someone who enjoyed pregnancy and has done pregnancy well and has done delivery well, but also a healthy uterus. And my uterus is completely fine. We take medications to thicken the uterine lining. We take medications to just prepare your body for pregnancy again, since, of course, when you're not conceiving naturally, you're not going to be producing those hormones that your body naturally would when it's preparing for a baby on its own. So I had to take medications. I had to inject myself with progesterone, which was a bitch to say the least. But after I had taught myself how to give myself those injections, I felt pretty empowered. And I was able to do it just fine, but I don't want to do it again. So yeah, I was able to be a surrogate with my tubes tied because if you don't know, your tubes release your eggs. And when you have your period is basically like the release of unused eggs. And I still have a period with my tubes tied. I don't know why. I wish I didn't have to, but I'm probably too young for a hysterectomy. But my uterus was completely fine. and we had done all medical testing and they were ready to go. We did an embryo transfer, which involved me taking medications for like a few days to a few weeks before the embryo transfer. If you want to see what it looks like, I have this video on my YouTube when I announced that I was doing surrogacy, because I documented a lot of the process and I documented the embryo transfer. And basically on transfer day, you go in with a full bladder. I had to drink lots of water, and they want to be able to see with the like ultrasound what your uterus looks like. And the doctor is amazing. She did a few like test runs. They use a catheter, and she used a mock catheter, I believe, or she just kind of like used the regular catheter and pretended like she was putting one in. She found my C-section scar on the inside and was like, okay, I know for a fact I don't want to place the embryo near your C-section scar because that could create complications and you could have like uterine rupture, and we don't want anything like that. So she made sure to practice exactly where to place it, and then she ended up placing it where she thought was best. And we were like, okay, you're assumed to be pregnant right now, so go home and relax, and you'll come back for blood work, and then we'll see if you're pregnant. And of course, with my amazing luck and just the fact that I had prayed on this and said, if this is right for me, then this is going to go well and I'm going to continue with this surrogacy journey. Of course, it was right for me, and we were pregnant with the first try, which I'm not going to say is rare because a lot of people can get pregnant with the first try and the embryo transfer, but I have seen people struggle and not conceive with the first transfer. Sometimes they don't conceive at all. And that's why some intended parents are adamant about doing multiple embryo transfers in one, where, well, I'm not going to say multiple transfers, but it's like one transfer and they place multiple embryos in there and just hope for one to stick. And that's what we were going to do. But the doctor said because I had already had 2 C-sections and this would be my third, that adding another baby in there might complicate things and my uterus could rupture. And that scared me because my friend had actually died from a uterine rupture a year ago, a little over a year ago, probably a few months before we started doing the embryo transfer. So the doctor spoke to both parties and said it would be safer just to do one. And luckily we were able to have one successful one. Yeah, it was just like a perfect story, like something out of a movie. One transfer went well. No complications throughout my pregnancy. So that was a question he had about, what is it like? Am I carrying my own child? The short answer, no, I'm not carrying my own child. But I wanted to add this. A lot of people ask, are you afraid that you're going to be attached to the baby, or do you feel an attachment to the baby? Do you feel like you're giving up your own child? My answer is no, like a huge no, because when I went into this, and it may be different for other surrogates, but when I went into it, my tubes were already tied. My husband has a vasectomy. We decided to stop having kids after we had our daughter. We have a perfect son and daughter. That's all I wanted. I was completely content. I was never the person who wanted a bunch of kids. Me being fixed, for lack of a better word, made things a lot easier because I never wanted more children, and I know what bringing a child home from the hospital involves, especially within that first year, and I just do not want to do that over again. That is of course it's a beautiful experience, but for me it is a traumatizing experience, not because anything had happened to either one of my kids, but you just know that SIDS is a huge risk from birth to a year old. And even without thinking about SIDS, just trying to keep a baby alive, there's so many accidents that can happen within that first year especially, and I did not want to relive that. But I do pregnancy extremely well. If you've seen me throughout my pregnancies, I love being pregnant. I am at my best when I'm pregnant. I am glowing through the entire pregnancy. I lose weight during my pregnancies, and not in an unhealthy way. It's just my arms and legs get skinny. My face and neck get skinny. My cheekbones are just popping, and I look amazing. I love being pregnant, but I knew that I was done in my heart. So I never once felt oh, I want to bring this baby home from the hospital. Even though I was recovering from a C-section and just in pain in bed watching the baby with his parents, I would forget that I was the one who gave birth, and I was just looking at them like I was so proud and so happy for a good friend or a family member. You're just really proud and accomplished after having a baby for someone else. At least for me, I was. Yeah, I always compare it to seeing a sister, cousin, or good friend having a baby, and like you're going to the hospital to visit them and hold their newborn. Like that was me when I held their baby. It never felt like I was holding my baby. It was just like, oh my gosh, he's so cute. He looks like you, because I know whose embryo they used for it. So I was like, oh, he looks like you, Dad. And he's just so cute and perfect. Even though I gave birth to him, I was not genetically related to the baby, you know. He is not my biological son. I was literally the oven. And it's funny when people do ask about that, because I'm like, I had a white baby with like blue eyes and blonde hair, and I am Mexican. I mean, I know there are white Mexicans, but my hair is naturally like black. My eyes are naturally black, and we look nothing alike. Our features are completely different. And my kids are white too, but they at least had like black hair when they were born. And this baby just looks nothing like me and everything like one of his dads. And I think people assume just because like you gave birth to a baby that that's yours. But that's why I like to talk about this, because if you don't know anyone who's done surrogacy and haven't looked into it, you kind of just like assume these things, and it's kind of treated like a taboo, because most of the time we hear celebrities using surrogacy, and then you want to respect their privacy. They never talk about who their surrogate is, stuff like that. And so that's why I'm completely fine with sharing my surrogacy experience and talking about it, answering those commonly asked questions. And I hear people saying like, oh, I could never be a surrogate. I would get too attached to the baby. I'll probably just donate my eggs one day. And that's when I'm like, oh, child, you know nothing. No, not you know nothing. I don't want to say that, but I'm like, oh no, think about it. Egg donation seems like you could just walk away and be cool, but that's actually your child. Like, yes, I'm doing the surrogacy. I'm carrying them for 9 months and I'm feeling all their little kicks, but I know mentally and I see physically that that's not my child when the child is born, at least. But when you're an egg donor, that is your egg. That is your DNA in them. They're literally half of you. And I know some amazing people can step away from that mindset and donate their eggs and be completely fine and meet the children they've created and keep a relationship with them and not feel anything towards them. But I'm like, if you're thinking surrogacy is going to like make you attached to your baby, you're in for a huge surprise with egg donation, because that's your egg. And what if one day you can't have a child of your own, and the only child you know that has ever been created from your egg is an egg you donated? Like, I feel like that could mess with someone's head a little bit more than a surrogate who is literally just an oven for someone else's bun. If you're going to do egg donation, sperm donation, become a surrogate, please do your research, look into it more. I'll be honest and say that I didn't do much research. I had just kind of always known about surrogacy, but I didn't know everything. Like, I didn't know that I could be a surrogate with my tubes tied. And that was one of the questions that I asked when I first inquired about being a surrogate. Of course, they're like, yes, you can do it. What else? I also asked if I could be a surrogate on Accutane. Well, I knew I couldn't be a surrogate on Accutane, and I was like, okay, I'm off Accutane in December. Like, it's like my last month. And I asked if I could do it having done Accutane. They knew I was on it at that moment, and she was like, yeah, you'll just have to get permission from your dermatologist. And my dermatologist said, yeah, when you're done with Accutane, you just have to wait 1 month before you can start doing the whole medical testing and, you know, everything that just goes into the process of becoming a surrogate. So during that time, I just did all the paperwork aspects, and then when we were in the clear with the dermatologist, then we started the surrogacy process. And of course, I had no complications because I did everything by the book. Another question I get asked a lot about surrogacy is the cost of surrogacy for intended parents and how much you get paid as a surrogate. I know I got paid around $30,000, I want to say. And the only reason I'm like, I don't know, is because you don't get paid in a lump sum, it's like monthly payments. So I would have to go back and look at all the checks and deposits and stuff like that. But yeah, just a ballpark answer would be 30 to 35,000. And for intended parents, I don't know from experience, but I was looking up the answers for my friend yesterday because he's looking into being an intended parent within, I don't know, probably the next 10 years. And I told him, save around $100,000 just to be safe. But our website actually says $71,000 to $78,000, and that there's a breakdown on there. So I won't really go into it just because I'm not too educated on that process, considering I only deal with potential surrogates for my job. And I know it sounds expensive, but you have to keep in mind you have insurance that you have to pay for your surrogate. You have IVF fees. You have the surrogate compensation package. There's a lot that goes into it. So then when you see the breakdown, you're like, okay, that makes sense. It's definitely doable. I know the website says $71,000 to $78,000, but I say just try and save $100,000 if you can. And I know this conversation is not going to be for everyone because I definitely am not the person who could be like, oh yeah, totally, I'll just save $100,000. But if surrogacy is for you and you know it's for you and it's like your life goal to have a child through surrogacy, if you're not able to conceive any other way, that's why I'm bringing this up and talking about this, just because I feel like a lot of people are afraid to talk about money. And usually I would get uncomfortable when people would ask about my compensation for surrogacy, but that was during my surrogacy journey before I worked for the surrogacy center. So now that I work for them, I am more comfortable talking about it just because it's something I bring up when I'm talking to potential surrogates, and I want to make sure everyone knows everything that they can possibly find out before doing surrogacy. Also, when I wasn't working for the surrogacy agency, I didn't want to give out false information, and I kind of felt weird having people ask me as if I was the most educated on surrogacy, and I was like, no, I'm literally just a surrogate. You can ask any other surrogate, but your best bet would be to ask someone who works in this field. And now I'm a surrogate ambassador, so my job is to share about my own journey and to let others know what they can expect for surrogacy and ask about their preferences, let them know they're allowed to have preferences, just kind of make things easier on them and take away any worries, answer questions they may have before they decide to apply to become a surrogate. So back to my own surrogacy journey, obviously I was pregnant. Everything was fine. Of course, I had to go in for ultrasounds and testing a little bit more than someone who was just having their own child. But I had absolutely no complications throughout the entire pregnancy. I enjoyed my pregnancy to the fullest. I documented pretty much the whole thing on my Instagram and my YouTube channel. And I did get to hang out with my intended parents probably about 3 different occasions before the baby was actually here. The reason they were able to be here for the birth, even though they lived in Australia, was because I had only ever had C-sections. One was an emergency one when I had my son in Germany, and I heard that they kind of push an emergency C-section on moms in Germany. So that experience was taken away from me because they completely put me to sleep and I woke up not knowing what happened. Then my second pregnancy was a planned C-section because I wanted to know what was going to happen and actually be involved as much as I can. That went extremely well, and I was like, oh my God, I wish I could have this perfect experience every single time. So once again, I got to request a planned C-section, and they were completely fine with that because that meant we would schedule the C-section and the intended parents would fly in, which is exactly what happened. We scheduled the C-section and the intended parents made their plans, flew out days before, and they were here. They both got to be in the operating room. My husband actually got to be in there too because he kind of like walked in there, and I had just said, I want the intended parents to be in there, and he was gonna leave, but the anesthesiologist was like, oh no, you can stay. So all 3 of the guys got to stay. It was the most perfect experience I could have ever asked for. And I'm really happy to know that it was better than the experiences with my children, because I felt extremely accomplished, and it was like, wow, that was the best experience. And I know that this was meant for me my entire life, even if I never thought about doing it myself. And it's funny because when I had my first son, I always made jokes about the movie Baby Mama. I'm like, oh my God, I'm Amy Poehler in Baby Mama. And if you've never seen that, she's a surrogate in that movie. And here I am, 10 years after that movie came out, over here being a surrogate. So it's funny how life plays out, and you never know what's in the cards for you. But if you want to see my entire surrogacy experience and the birth process, you can go watch that on my YouTube channel. I'm just going to talk about one last thing as far as surrogacy goes for me. People want to know how the process is after you have the baby, and does the baby just go home with the parents? How does that work? Basically, in Hawaii, at least, we lack surrogacy laws. So in other states, you can do the paperwork ahead of time to have the legal parents be the intended parents. But in Hawaii, your baby is assumed to be yours and your spouse's when you give birth to them, even if it's a surrogate. So we did all the paperwork with the attorneys, and I signed the baby over to the intended parents. So they're able to take the baby home from the hospital. And my husband has to sign paperwork claiming that he is not the father. And then we had a court date set for a later time, which we didn't get to make it to because of COVID, but we did it over the phone. And that was to establish paternity as the intended parents being the father, and then adoption. So the other dad, who wasn't biologically the father, could adopt the baby and sign away all of our rights to the baby because he's not ours, even though he was assumed to be ours. So that sounds like it's a huge process, but honestly, the attorneys know what they're doing, and it was really easy for us. We just had to sit on the phone and be like, yep, yes, I agree, that's their child, and that was it. And I didn't expect for it to be emotional, but of course the dads got emotional because, it is an adoption process at the same time as us doing surrogacy, because at least in their situation, it wasn't both of their embryos. Yeah, so that was basically my surrogacy journey experience. Some questions I've been asked about it. If I left anything out, feel free to ask me on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube comments, whatever, and I'll always come back and address anything anyone would like to know about surrogacy, just because I always have to talk about surrogacy anyway. I work in this field now, and I don't mind helping or answering anyone's questions and maybe inspiring them to become a surrogate, whether it's with our company or not. I just want to make it a little bit less of a taboo, because I know when I was growing up, I just always thought celebrities had surrogates and that was it. I remember my mom saying she wanted to do it, and she didn't really know how, because back then, the internet wasn't like right at our fingertips, but I'm really glad I got to do this. So thank you, Lorenzo. Lorenzo is my friend who I spoke to on the phone yesterday, for asking all those questions, because it gave me a great idea for this podcast. So that's the end of this podcast episode. I apologize if it is too short for your liking, but of course, we always have next week. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you return for next week, and I will talk to you soon.